class, Mr. Rasmussen here. This is lesson 12C, and in lesson 12C, we're going to be looking at blood vessels. We're going to be looking at the anatomy of these veins and arteries that carry your blood. First off, I want to start off by defining arteries and veins. There is a misconception. A lot of people think that arteries carry oxygen-rich blood. So anything that has blood with a lot of oxygen in it, we're going to call it an artery. And anything that has blood with very little oxygen in it, we're going to call it a vein. That's not actually true. There are circuits in our body, one of our circuits. This is totally not true. The arteries carry oxygen-poor blood and the veins carry oxygen-rich blood. So what actually is the definition of an artery and vein? Well, real simply, veins carry blood to the heart. So anything in which the blood is returning to the heart, that's going to be a vein. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. So any vessel that carries blood away from the heart is going to be an artery. Now, because of this, they have wildly different anatomy. Arteries have to be thick. They have to be able to withstand a lot of pressure caused by the heart, because the heart's pumping blood really strong through arteries. But by the time it gets back to the veins, there's very little blood pressure. Most of that blood pressure is diffused in the capillaries. So by the time it reaches the veins, they don't have to be strong to hold all the blood pressure. But they do have to have some interesting changes because of the fact that they don't have a heart to move the blood around in. So veins, they don't have blood pressure to return the blood to your heart. So some interesting adaptations is the word I'm looking for veins. All right, let's look at an anatomy of a blood vessel. An anatomy of a blood vessel, there are three major regions. Both arteries and veins have the same anatomy. Very similar. There are some adaptations that are different, but for the main part, they have the same anatomy. So if we take a look, the outside layer is this tunica externa, and that's this tissue layer around here. We can see it labeled over here, the tunica externa. And it's mainly connective tissue, just stuff to hold the vessel together. The tunica media is very different, though. The tunica media contains smooth muscle. And the smooth muscle allows us to control where the blood moves in our body. For instance, if a lion jumps out of the woods at us or jumps out of the plains at us, and we need to run away from that lion as fast as possible, we need to make sure our legs have tons of oxygen, tons of blood. So because of that, we can relax the blood vessels in our legs, allowing our legs to get lots of oxygen. It's that smooth muscle in the tunica media that allows us to control where oxygen or where blood goes. And finally, the tunica interna, which mainly contains this tissue layer here. As you can see in this diagram, this final basement layer here called the endothelium. And then on the inside, the space in between where the blood flows is called the lumen. The lumen. Spaces inside stuff in biology are usually called lumen. So there we go. If we take a look at another picture of this, here's the artery and the vein. So we have that epithelial tissue, that last internal lining of tissue. And then right inside of it, we have that smooth muscle in the tunica media. And then we have that connective tissue in the tunica externa. So those are the major anatomy. And if we take a look at the arteries and the veins, they have the same one. They have the same connective tissue, they have the same smooth muscle, and they have the same epithelial tissue. Now, for the main part, the smooth muscle is less. It's not as thick. And the reason for that is, and we'll talk about that more later, but the reason is because arteries have more blood pressure. We don't want those vessels rupturing, so we need to have more thickness to handle the pressure. Okay, if we take a look at a artery and vein comparison, so if we're to compare these two types of blood vessels, the main thing is the walls of the artery are thicker. And that's for that reason that I just discussed. We need to be able to make sure that those arteries can handle lots of blood pressure. Lots of blood pressure. The blood that's coming out of there is coming out of there at a high volume and with lots of pressure on it. So we need to make sure that those walls are thicker and so that they can withstand the pressure. Arteries are more resilient, and they're more resilient for the same reason. They're less easy to rupture, they're less easy to break, and that's because the walls are thicker, and that's for the reason that we need them to handle the blood pressure. And finally, the weird one is veins contain valves. So veins actually have valves, and I only see a valve over here. And the reason is this. Artery the blood that's moving away from our heart and arteries has a heart to pump it. So the heart's pressure actually pushes that blood out there. But by the time it gets to a vein, there's no pressure. None. Your heart's done pumping. It doesn't pump the blood back through the veins real well. So we need a way for that blood to get back all the way up from our feet all the way back up to our heart. And it does this by valves. So these valves allow blood to move in one direction. For instance, it allows it to move back towards the heart, but then as the blood tries to fall back down, the valves close. So in veins, blood can only move in one direction. Artery, it could move in both directions, but really because of the heart pumping, it only moves in one direction. Okay, I just want to end up this lesson talking a little bit about capillaries and sort of some anatomy here. So arteries are the major blood vessels. So arteries are these major blood vessels, and those arteries break into what we call arterioles. Arterioles are these smaller branches off an artery, and then after the arterioles branch into what are called these capillaries. Then the capillaries come back together in venules, and those venules form up veins. So veins are the major type of vein, I guess I can say. Venules are small branches, and arterioles are small branches off of the arteries. But this capillary bed lies in between it. It's a capillary bed that provides oxygen and provides nutrients and eliminates waste to all the tissues. Pretty much every cell in your body has a capillary touching it. It needs to have a capillary nearby or else it won't be able to get oxygen. So every cell in your body has a capillary that's near it. So these capillaries extend throughout your entire cells. They are going to move stuff by osmotic pressure. And a good example of this would be oxygen. So your cells, so if we look out here, here's a blood vessel and here's a cell. So if we look out of this, the blood vessel that's coming from your heart has lots of oxygen in it. Lots of oxygen in it. But your cell has just used up all of its oxygen. So this has lots, but this has very little oxygen. Very little oxygen. Well, because of that, oxygen is simply going to diffuse into the cell. Oxygen wants to go where there's less. It wants to move from high concentration to low concentration. So oxygen is simply going to just diffuse into that cell. And the same for carbon dioxide. Carbon dioxide, the cell has been making carbon dioxide, and the blood got rid of it all. So in the cell we have a high concentration of carbon dioxide, and in the blood we have a low concentration of carbon dioxide. Draw an arrow down here to say low. So because of that, the carbon dioxide is going to move from the cells into the blood, simply by diffusion. So we're going to move things by diffusion in and out of the cells at that capillary layer. Okay, those are the major things I want you to know about vessels, class. If you have any questions, feel free to ask me. Thanks for your time. Have a good one.